The golden glow of late afternoon danced across the glass storefronts of downtown Boston as Sabrina Carter, 34, stepped off the sidewalk in front of the Crystal Palace. She carried herself with quiet grace, no flashy jewelry, no designer heels, just a well-loved beige cardigan, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder, and comfortable walking shoes that had molded to her feet from years of service. Her jeans were speckled faintly with dried clay, a testament to the pottery class she had just wrapped up at the community arts center where she taught part-time. It had been a long day, but a fulfilling one. As she glanced at her phone, the screen lit up, 4:57 p.m. Just in time. Sabrina wasn't here to dine. She was simply hoping to secure a dinner reservation for next Friday, the 15th anniversary of her marriage to Marcus Carter. 15 years of building a life together, from struggling newlyweds living in a tiny walk-up to becoming one of Boston's most respected philanthropic couples. Marcus had recently launched a groundbreaking clean energy initiative that had drawn national attention. And while he was often caught up in boardrooms and briefings, Sabrina remained grounded, teaching art, mentoring teens, and keeping the soul of their relationship alive. She had a plan to surprise him: dinner at the Crystal Palace, the very restaurant where they'd shared their first date. Back then, they could barely afford the appetizer. Now, things were different, but her heart was still in the same place. As Sabrina opened the ornate glass door, cool air brushed her face, carrying with it the soft hum of a string quartet playing near the bar and the clinking of fine cutlery against porcelain plates. The interior was opulent, high-vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and tables draped in pristine white linen. Waiters in black vests moved like clockwork, attending to Boston's social elite. Behind the podium stood Vanessa, the maitre d', a slender woman in a sharp black suit, her blonde hair tied into a perfect bun. Her eyes flicked quickly over Sabrina, starting with her cardigan, landing on her worn jeans, and a tight smile formed. "Good evening," Sabrina said, her voice warm and respectful. "I'd like to make a reservation for next Friday evening, if possible. It's for a very special occasion, our 15th wedding anniversary." Vanessa's smile didn't falter, but her tone cooled slightly. "We're fully booked for the next 3 months, ma'am." Sabrina nodded patiently. "I understand, but I was hoping there might be a cancellation list." Before Vanessa could reply, a man in a tailored suit, loud cologne trailing behind him, approached the desk. He was Charles Whitman, a local real estate mogul with a reputation for excess and arrogance. He threw Sabrina a quick, dismissive glance and spoke to Vanessa like Sabrina wasn't even there. "I thought this place had standards," he said loudly enough for nearby diners to hear. "Since when do we let just anyone strolling off the street?" Sabrina stood her ground, her chin high, but her heart, for a moment, sank. Sabrina Carter had grown used to being underestimated, but not like this. She maintained her composure, clasping her hands gently in front of her as Charles Whitman threw another jab her way. "I mean, really," he said to no one in particular, as if performing for an audience. "I didn't realize the Crystal Palace was open to walk-ins dressed for a garage sale." Several diners chuckled behind their wine glasses. Sabrina felt their eyes, not curious, but judgmental, measuring her as if she were an intruder. Still, she took a breath and kept her voice steady. "I'm not here to dine this evening," she explained to Vanessa, keeping her smile in place. "Just to reserve a table for next week. I understand you're busy, but this place holds a lot of meaning for my husband and me." Vanessa offered a smile, but it was the kind that didn't reach the eyes. "As I said, we're fully booked for the next 3 months. And unfortunately, we don't keep a cancellation list." "That's strange," Sabrina replied gently. "I heard from a friend that you made exceptions for anniversaries. I'd be happy to leave a deposit." Charles scoffed again, interrupting with a dramatic sigh. "Vanessa, could we please get on with it? My guests are waiting. We don't have time for charity cases." Sabrina turned toward him now, not with anger, but with calm clarity. "Sir, I don't believe we've been introduced, but I'd appreciate if you didn't speak to me like that." He smirked. "You're right. My mistake. Let me guess, your husband is someone very important?" He made air quotes with his fingers, clearly amused with himself. Before Sabrina could respond, a woman in a tailored navy suit approached, the restaurant manager, Karen Blake. Her expression was clipped and controlled, but her eyes were already cold. "Is there an issue here?" Karen asked, eyes flicking between Sabrina and Charles. Vanessa jumped in before Sabrina could answer. This woman was just leaving. "I wasn't finished," Sabrina said calmly. "I was just trying to explain the importance of the date." "I must ask you to leave," Karen cut in, her tone condescending. "You're disturbing our guests." "Disturbing?" Sabrina echoed, the word landing heavy in her chest. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't done anything except request a reservation." Karen stepped closer and lowered her voice. "This establishment maintains a certain standard. You don't meet it." Sabrina's hands curled slightly at her sides. She had been disrespected before in subtle ways, being talked over in meetings, mistaken for staff at charity events, but this was different. This was deliberate. Public. Vanessa turned away. Karen gestured toward a young host in a navy vest, Ethan, no older than 23. "Please show her the door." Ethan hesitated. "Ma'am." "It's fine," Sabrina said quietly, lifting her chin. "I see what this place values. Thank you for confirming it." As she stepped back into the cool Boston air, the sting in her chest wasn't from embarrassment, but injustice. The evening air bit a little sharper than it had just moments before. Sabrina Carter stood on the sidewalk outside the Crystal Palace, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her cardigan. Across the street, the golden glow of a bakery window softened the edges of her reflection in the restaurant's glass doors. Inside, she could still see Vanessa returning to her podium, and Karen Blake, the manager, speaking in hushed tones with Charles Whitman, who now looked smugger than ever. Sabrina stared for a moment, debating whether to call Marcus. This wasn't how she wanted their anniversary plans to begin, with confrontation and humiliation. But just as she pulled out her phone, she heard it, that unmistakable low hum, smooth and controlled, like a cello note floating through a quiet concert hall. She didn't have to turn around. She knew that sound. A sleek, black Porsche 911 Turbo eased up to the curb, its polished surface catching the last glimmers of sunlight. The car door opened, and out stepped Marcus Carter, his tall frame cutting a refined silhouette against the city skyline. Dressed in a navy tuxedo and cufflinks shaped like miniature solar panels, a nod to his company, he looked every bit the successful entrepreneur he had become. Marcus spotted Sabrina instantly. His brow furrowed as he walked quickly toward her. "I thought you were just stopping in to check on the reservation," he said, gently taking her hand. "What happened?" Sabrina's voice was low. "I tried to explain. They wouldn't listen. Said I didn't meet their standard." Marcus's jaw clenched. Not in a showy way, but the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. He turned toward the restaurant. Inside, the Crystal Palace continued its rhythm, music floating from the baby grand, wine being poured into crystal goblets, conversations weaving in and out like threads in a tapestry. But that calm cracked the moment Marcus Carter stepped through the door. Vanessa's professional smile greeted him reflexively. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm here to meet my wife," Marcus replied evenly. Of course, Vanessa said, nodding. And your name? Marcus Carter. The name landed like a stone in a still pond. Vanessa's eyes widened just slightly. In business circles, Marcus wasn't just a tech executive, he was a respected voice on sustainability, diversity, and community equity. His TED Talk on ethical innovation had gone viral the year before. I don't believe we have a reservation under that name tonight, she said, her voice faltering. That's because my wife came in to make one, Marcus replied, his tone now unmistakably firm. For our 15th anniversary. Behind her, Karen Blake was already approaching, a strained smile on her face. Good evening, Mr. Carter. Please, allow me to help. Sabrina entered just behind Marcus, the room falling unusually silent. As she took his arm, she realized something had shifted, not just in the atmosphere, but in the balance of power. The dining room of the Crystal Palace had never felt so quiet. Even the violinist near the fireplace faltered for a beat when Marcus Carter stepped fully inside, his wife Sabrina at his side. Conversation ceased as if someone had turned down the volume on the entire restaurant. Patrons glanced up from their steak tartare and sea bass, forks frozen mid-air, eyes now following the poised couple walking toward the front podium. Karen Blake adjusted the collar of her navy blazer and cleared her throat. Mr. Carter, I assure you, whatever happened earlier was simply a misunderstanding. Marcus glanced sideways at Sabrina, then back at Karen with a calm but unwavering expression. A misunderstanding, he repeated, his tone flat. Is that what we're calling it now? Vanessa looked visibly shaken. She had been flipping through reservation cards with trembling hands, as if she could somehow revise the past 5 minutes. Your wife didn't mention who she was, Karen offered weakly. She tried, said a soft voice from the side. It was Ethan, the young host who had reluctantly escorted Sabrina out earlier. She tried more than once, but she kept getting cut off. Karen shot him a sharp glance, but the damage had been done. Sabrina took a small step forward. Her voice was clear, but not bitter. All I wanted was to make a reservation at the place where Marcus and I had our very first date. I wasn't asking for a free meal or special treatment. Just a little respect. From his corner table, Charles Whitman laughed derisively. Oh, come on. This is a 5-star establishment. You don't stroll in wearing jeans and expect to be welcomed with open arms. Marcus turned slowly toward him. And you are? Charles Whitman. I've been dining here since before you were on the cover of Forbes. I see, Marcus said, his voice even. And you felt it necessary to insult my wife while she tried to quietly make a dinner reservation? Charles shifted in his chair. This place has standards. That's what makes it exclusive. And that, Marcus said, his voice rising just enough for everyone to hear, is exactly the problem. Now the silence was heavier. Waitstaff paused in their service. Guests stared. Even Karen Blake looked as though she'd aged 5 years in the last 5 minutes. My wife, Marcus continued, is an art educator, a community leader, and the reason I've stayed grounded through every success I've had. If you can't treat her with dignity, then you don't deserve our business, tonight or ever. Sabrina looked up at him, pride warming her chest despite the tension. Let's go, Marcus said gently, offering her his hand. Karen reached out. Mr. Carter, please, we'll prepare a table right away. Complimentary, of course. Marcus turned back, his words like the closing of a courtroom verdict. Respect isn't something you hand out after a mistake. It's something you give freely, or not at all. As Marcus and Sabrina Carter turned to leave the Crystal Palace, something unexpected happened. A chair scraped across the marble floor. All heads turned as an older woman, dressed in a modest but elegant navy evening gown, rose from a corner table. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her pearls understated but timeless. She stepped forward with quiet determination, her husband trailing just behind her, cane in hand. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice clear and full of purpose, "what you said needed to be said." Marcus paused, surprised but attentive. "I'm Evelyn Harris," she continued. "My husband George and I have been dining here for over 20 years. We've celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, even our grandson's graduation." George gave a soft nod beside her. "But tonight," he said, "we saw something we can't unsee." Evelyn looked around the room, her voice steady. "This place has changed. It used to value good food and gracious company. Now it values appearances and connections. What happened to your wife was wrong, and it wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a decision. A series of them." The room held its breath. "We won't be returning," George added. "No matter how fine the wine list is." Karen Blake opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. And then, from near the kitchen doors, another voice chimed in. It was Ethan, the young host. He stepped forward, his navy vest looking suddenly oversized on his slight frame. "I quit," he said, his voice cracking slightly but gaining strength. "I've been uncomfortable with how we treat people here for months. But tonight crossed a line." Gasps echoed. Vanessa, still behind the podium, gaped at him in disbelief. "Ethan, think about your future, this job." "I am," he replied, unfastening the name tag from his chest and placing it gently on the desk. "That's why I can't stay." Sabrina looked at him with a soft, appreciative smile, touched by the courage it had taken for him to speak up. Across the dining room, Charles Whitman pushed back his chair noisily and stood, clearly irked at the growing tide of dissent. "Oh, let's not turn this into a moral crusade," he barked. "Places like this have rules for a reason. We don't want to start judging people by feelings rather than facts." "Facts?" Evelyn turned toward him. "Here's a fact, Mr. Whitman, no one is too important to be kind. And no one is so wealthy they're above decency." Applause broke out, not thunderous, but sincere, from a few tables. Enough to matter. Marcus turned to Sabrina. "Ready?" She nodded, her voice quiet but sure. "Let's go." As they stepped outside once again into the Boston evening, the restaurant behind them stood in awkward silence. Not because of a spectacle, but because truth, when spoken clearly, leaves little room for denial. And sometimes, it takes just a few brave voices to remind a room full of people what dignity truly looks like. 3 days had passed since that unforgettable night at the Crystal Palace. The story had traveled fast, faster than either Marcus or Sabrina Carter expected. Although no official statement had been made by the restaurant, word of mouth and whispers around Boston's social circles did the work. A few quiet apologies were extended behind closed doors. But neither Marcus nor Sabrina sought revenge. What mattered to them was the principle and the path forward. In her art studio that afternoon, Sabrina sat at her pottery wheel, her fingers coated in soft red clay as she shaped a vase. The warm light from the windows spilled across the room, illuminating finished pieces on the shelves, bowls, teapots, sculptures, each one telling a quiet story. Her phone buzzed on the nearby table. A message flashed across the screen. "Hi, it's Ethan. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I have an idea." Sabrina's eyes softened. "Ethan, the young host who had quit his job to stand up for what was right. She had admired his courage that night. A few minutes later, they were on a call. Ethan explained that he had long dreamed of starting a youth arts program in the city, something affordable, even free, for teens who had nowhere else to go after school. He'd seen firsthand how often young people were judged before being given a chance. He wanted to create a space that judged no one, only nurtured creativity. By the time he finished explaining, Sabrina was already smiling. "I think," she said warmly, "we can make that happen." That evening, she shared the idea with Marcus, who listened intently while stirring a pot of chili in their kitchen. They had always believed in using their resources not to make statements, but to make impact. "We'll bring it to the foundation board," Marcus said. "Let's fund it properly, space, supplies, mentorship. Not a pilot. A program." The following week, the Carter Foundation approved full funding for the Open Canvas initiative, named by Ethan himself. He and Sabrina began scouting locations in Roxbury and Dorchester, neighborhoods often overlooked in Boston's art and education conversations. Sabrina would mentor instructors, while Ethan focused on outreach and logistics. Meanwhile, the Crystal Palace saw a shift of its own. Vanessa quietly resigned. Karen Blake was placed on administrative leave, and a press release later announced a reevaluation of leadership and policies to ensure inclusivity. Sabrina hadn't requested any of it. In fact, she asked that her name be left out of all articles covering the story. It wasn't about headlines. It was about planting seeds that could grow into something meaningful. One afternoon, Ethan stopped by Sabrina's studio with a stack of sketches drawn by local teens who had attended a trial workshop. Sabrina carefully turned each page, her eyes glistening. "They just needed someone to believe in them," Ethan said. Sabrina looked up from the drawings and nodded. "So did you." The day of their 15th anniversary arrived with the scent of early spring in the air, crocuses poking through the soil, a gentle breeze stirring the wind chimes outside the Carter home. Sabrina stood by the hallway mirror, adjusting a simple navy wrap dress. No sequins. No designer tag. Just something that felt like her. Marcus, finishing up an email to the board, glanced over at her. "You look beautiful," he said, setting his laptop aside. "And I still don't know where we're going." She smiled. "You'll see." Instead of heading toward the glossy heart of Boston's fine dining scene, they drove west, past the brownstones and boutiques, over the Charles River, and into a quieter, working-class neighborhood. When they pulled up to a modest brick building with a hand-painted wooden sign that read "Common Table," Marcus raised an eyebrow, amused. "This is it?" he asked. "This is it," Sabrina said, stepping out of the car. Inside, the atmosphere was nothing like the Crystal Palace. There were no chandeliers or tuxedoed hosts. Instead, long wooden tables stretched across the room, filled with people of every age and background. Children passed plates of garlic bread to their parents. College students helped seniors with trays. The air smelled of fresh herbs and roasted vegetables. Laughter mixed with the clinking of forks and soft jazz floating from a corner speaker. A cheerful woman in an apron greeted them. "Welcome to Common Table," she said. "Pay what you can, stay as long as you'd like." The Carters were shown to a table beside a family celebrating a little girl's birthday, complete with a homemade cake, and across from an older man dining alone, who smiled kindly as they sat. Moments later, Ethan appeared, his eyes bright. "You came," he said, slightly breathless. "I hoped you would." Sabrina stood and gave him a warm hug. "We wouldn't miss it." Ethan introduced them to Chef Marisol, a former executive chef who had walked away from Boston's high-end restaurant scene to create a space that nourished people in more ways than one. She shared how Common Table offered not only meals, but also cooking classes, job training, and support for individuals re-entering the workforce. "This is what community looks like," Marcus said as they sat down to share a homemade spinach lasagna served family style. Throughout the meal, conversations flowed freely, not about status or accolades, but about family, purpose, and second chances. No one asked Sabrina what she did for a living. No one looked twice at what she wore. And yet, she had never felt more seen. As dessert was served, a simple apple crisp topped with whipped cream, Marcus reached across the table and held her hand. "Happy anniversary," he said softly. Sabrina's eyes glistened. "This is exactly how I wanted to celebrate, surrounded by people who value what really matters." That night, as they drove home under a sky scattered with stars, Marcus whispered, "Thank you for reminding me. Not just today, but always." The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Sabrina Carter's art studio, casting warm streaks of light across her pottery wheel. Dust motes floated gently in the air as she worked, hands steady, mind focused, heart full. The clay between her fingers slowly began to take shape, a wide, welcoming bowl. She often told her students that the vessel you create reflects the space you hold for others. From the doorway, Marcus Carter watched quietly, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He placed one beside her work table, careful not to interrupt her rhythm. "The board gave final approval this morning," he said. "The Open Canvas initiative gets full funding, 2 years, with expansion plans." Sabrina looked up and smiled. "I knew they'd see its value." Ethan's proposal was thoughtful, and more than that, needed. Since the night at the Crystal Palace, change had begun in more than one place. Word of what had happened reached the editorial desk of the Boston Globe, and although Sabrina declined to be named in the article, the piece sparked a citywide discussion about inclusion and the subtle ways prejudice persists in prestigious spaces. Meanwhile, the restaurant underwent leadership changes. Vanessa resigned. Karen Blake was quietly replaced. And then, one day, a handwritten letter arrived at the Carter home, from Vanessa. Not a press move, but a personal apology. She had begun volunteering at a local women's shelter and wanted to thank Sabrina for opening her eyes. "She asked to meet," Marcus said thoughtfully. "I think she's sincere." Sabrina nodded. "Then maybe it's time." Across town, the Common Table continued to thrive. Word had spread about its pay-what-you-can policy, and now, chefs from around the city volunteered once a week to cook for the community. Sabrina and Marcus often returned, not as VIPs, but as neighbors, listening and learning. One day, passing by the Crystal Palace, Sabrina noticed a new sign posted in the window. The gilded letters were gone. In their place, a simple message. "Under new management, all are welcome." She paused for a moment, not out of bitterness, but reflection. Sometimes, she thought, change comes with a roar. But more often, it comes in quiet, steady steps, through choices, through conversations, through standing firm when it's easier to walk away. That evening, she and Marcus sat on their back porch, warm drinks in hand. The porch swing creaked gently beneath them as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Do you remember what you said the first time we met?" Marcus asked. Sabrina smiled. "That the most valuable things in life can't be bought or worn. They have to be lived." He nodded. "And you've proven that. Every single day." As fireflies flickered in the yard and the sound of kids playing echoed from down the block, they sat quietly, knowing that their love, rooted in values, grown through trials, had left its mark not in headlines, but in hearts. At its heart, this story is not about wealth, status, or confrontation. It's about character, respect, and the quiet strength it takes to stand up for what's right. For older adults who have lived through decades of change, it serves as a powerful reminder: true worth is never measured by appearance or possessions, but by how we treat others, especially when there's nothing to gain. Sabrina Carter's experience at the Crystal Palace shows how easily people can be dismissed based on superficial judgments. But instead of reacting with anger or pride, she responded with grace, and her dignity inspired change. Her husband, Marcus, didn't defend her out of ego, but out of love and shared values. Together, they reminded a room full of onlookers, and all of us, what real integrity looks like. As we age, many of us reflect on what we leave behind. Is it a legacy of material success? Or one of kindness, fairness, and courage in the face of injustice? This story challenges us to use our voice, no matter how soft, to speak for those who aren't heard. It invites us to mentor the younger generation, to model humility, and to never underestimate the power of one act of decency. Whether we're dining in a five-star restaurant or sitting at a community table, we all deserve to be seen, not for what we wear, but for who we are. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is this: sometimes, the smallest gestures of respect can spark the greatest transformations.